Welcome to Season 4 of the Comfortably Hungry podcast, where yesterday's dinner is tomorrow's history. If you're a peckish person who is curious about the history of food and drink, then you're in the right place. I'm Sam Bilton, an author of some rather niche books who adores her history and food. And by the end of this podcast, I hope you'll be a fan of food history too. You can see what historical delicacies I'm cooking at the moment on Instagram, Threads or Blue Sky at Mrs. Bilton, that's with 2 S's. In Season 4, we're going to be immersing ourselves in the fascinating world of fresh water, which as we all know is vital to life. We'll be journeying through the centuries to learn more about the food, drink and medicines water provides, its spiritual significance, discovering how water has been used to prepare and preserve our victuals, and how water has been utilised as a source of power and transportation for the food sector. Some of the topics will be obvious, but as ever, I hope that one or two will be pleasantly surprising. As with earlier seasons of the Comfortably Hungry podcast, the guests will be invited to bring a dish to the season's virtual potluck supper. And we've had some delicious contributions, I can tell you. The paid subscribers to the Comfortably Hungry Substack will also get access to recipes inspired by the topics covered in this season. For millennia, humans have been in awe of the elements. As Veronica Strang observes in her book, Water Beings, From Nature Beings to Environmental Crisis, material environments are alive with movement. Wind, water and light all produce an animated world, and at every spatial and temporal scale, there is nothing more animated than water. It swirls and pours as mist and rain, rushes down waterfalls, and hurls itself onto shores. It zigzags in tiny runnels and meanders in great loops across landscapes. For many civilizations, this animated world was beyond the control of mere mortals and very much in the hands of the gods. Think of the veneration of gods like Zeus in Greek mythology or Thor in Norse mythology, who are associated with thunder, lightning and rain. Rain in particular has been valued as a precious commodity across many civilizations and ages. Even today, too little or too much can have a devastating effect on agriculture. In this episode, we'll be journeying to pre-Columbian Mesoamerica to explore why the worship of rain gods like Chaak was so crucial to the Mayans and discover the role that food played in these ceremonies. To aid me in this quest is Dr Gabrielle Vail, research collaborator in the Department of Anthropology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome to the podcast, Gaby.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with you.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your interest in Mesoamerica?
Yes, it's actually an interesting story. I didn't know really anything about Mesoamerica as a high school student, and I went to school in Florida at a small school called New College of Florida, actually modeled after New College of Oxford. And there I took a class on Maya and Olmec civilization. And it just introduced me to this whole new world. And as part of that, I started getting more interested in taking classes in anthropology and archaeology and had the opportunity to go to Mesoamerica, to the Maya area, as an undergraduate student. I worked at a site called Caracol on the border of Belize and Guatemala. And at the site, we had an epigrapher, somebody who studies hieroglyphic writing of ancient civilizations. His name was Steve Houston. And I was really fascinated by these hieroglyphic monuments and the texts and what did they tell us about these cultures. So he would have me go out with him at night and shine a flashlight for him as he was drawing the different texts, raking the light across it at different angles, and read the text to me, tell me what they said. So that was kind of the point that changed my career trajectory. I'd originally wanted to be a creative writer, and here I was going into archaeology. I went to Tulane as a graduate student and had another really pivotal moment when I took a class on the Maya codices, these screenfold books written in hieroglyphic texts that have almanacs and astronomical tables. And as a first-year graduate student in this seminar, I studied a set of almanacs on Maya deer hunting, deer trapping, and how they were related to rituals. And again, that was a kind of change in my trajectory. I decided to study the codices, which I've been doing for the past 30 or so years. So not such a short description, but this was really how I got involved. And as my career has evolved, I've also been very interested in what we call public archaeology and repatriation, the idea of returning both tangible and intangible heritage to the Maya peoples, the descendants of these ancestral populations. So that's what I've devoted a lot of my career lately to doing.
Well, it sounds very interesting. Have you actually got to handle the codices? I don't know. I imagine they're quite delicate, aren't they?
They're very delicate. And I should mention that we only have 4 codices left to us from what would have been thousands. And some of them deteriorated over time. Some have been discovered at archaeological sites in very deteriorated conditions, so we can't open them. The ones that are known to us now are in European collections, 3, one in Dresden, one in Madrid, and one in Paris. And I have seen all of them. I was actually able to work quite closely with the Paris Codex with a colleague, which was an incredible experience.
Oh, I can imagine.
And the 4th was actually found in a cave in Chiapas, Mexico in the 60s and is in Mexico, but in the capital. So none of these are actually accessible to most Maya people, most of these descendant populations. So I've worked on creating a database to make the images and transcriptions of them available to anyone who's interested in them. And I do workshops to try to bring this knowledge back to communities.
That's brilliant. And I'll pop a link to that website in the show notes so that people can go along and have a look themselves after they've listened to our talk, obviously. Can you briefly explain who the Maya are and what sort of region we're talking about in Central America?
Yes. So the term Maya is used to refer to a large group of people who speak languages that are descended from an original proto-language. And probably we can speak of Maya people for about 3 millennia. So it goes back very far in time. At the time of the Spanish conquest, which was in the early 16th century, speakers of Mayan languages inhabited parts of Mexico, so Chiapas, Mexico, and then the Yucatan Peninsula, and all of what is today Belize, Guatemala, parts of Honduras, and just a small part of El Salvador. And as I mentioned before, the site where I worked initially was on the Guatemalan-Belize border. And this here, it was a site called Caracol, a very important site in terms of what we know about Maya history and interactions between different sites, such as Tikal, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. I should also mention that we're talking about the period before contact, which we call pre-Hispanic or pre-Colombian, pre-colonial. And it consists of a couple of broad divisions that archaeologists identify, such as the pre-classic, the classic period, and the post-classic period. And the codices that I'm talking about come from this post-classic period. So they were written shortly before Spanish contact. And this post-classic period is a period following the socio-political, what's been termed the collapse or the reordering of Maya society, which began in the late 9th century and continued into the 11th century. And it's also important, this is a really broad region. So we're talking about lowland regions such as the Yucatan, then we have the highland regions such as in Chiapas, the highlands, and Guatemala. We also have a great diversity of landscapes, ecological niches, environmental zones in this region. And the people, Maya people today, and there are about 8 to 10 million Maya people living both in this region, but also throughout the world. They speak 30 or several more than 30 distinct Mayan languages, which are part of several distinct families. So this term Maya is very broad, and generally people identify by language, such as the Yucatec language that's spoken in the Yucatan Peninsula, which still has about 500,000 speakers, although unfortunately here and in a number of places, the younger generation isn't necessarily learning the language of their grandparents. The parents often speak more Spanish than the Maya language. And I do also want to mention that it's really important in terms of what we're talking about today, that the Maya region has distinct dry and rainy seasons. So a dry season beginning around November, going till the beginning of May, and then May through October being that rainy season. And the rainy season, of course, was very important, critical for growing the crops that people relied on for their survival, maize or corn being the most important. And in the northern area, the Yucatan that I've been talking about, there are no lakes or rivers. And so these rains were especially important. And they did, though, have sources of fresh water on the surface called cenotes, which are sinkholes that have formed. The area is a limestone karst, and these sinkholes sometimes form. And this provided important sources of fresh water. They do connect to the aquifer. And so today it's really important. One of the projects I've been involved in was sort of documenting these and educating Maya youths about the importance of these cenotes in both the cultural heritage and in terms of their importance in the ecosystem as well.
So you've just talked about the difference, obviously, in the seasons, having a dry season and a wet season. And this season of the podcast, I'm discussing water. So I'm particularly interested in the rainy season and how they sort of venerated the gods to try and encourage the rains. And I'm going to pronounce this god's name so badly. I know I am because I don't speak Mayan. I believe the name's Chaak?
Yes, Chaak.
Chaak, okay.
The A is, long A, Chaak.
So why was he so important to the Maya?
Well, in terms of the importance, it's really interesting because looking at these codices that I work with, he's actually the most common of the deities represented in the codices.
Oh, wow.
And it's interesting too. I want to talk a little bit about deities because rather than being a single entity, Chaak, for example, has multiple aspects associated with his different roles as rainbringer. He can also appear as aspects of Venus as morning or evening star. And he has 4 color directional associations. So the rituals involved in rainmaking ceremonies and things of this nature progress from east to north to west to south. And the center space is sort of where the ritual action, where the ceremonies take place, but they do move in this counterclockwise direction. And this is very important. So Chaak has aspects associated with each of the directions. For example, in one of the almanacs in the Madrid Codex, we see Chaak associated with the west, and he's standing in front of one of these cenotes represented by this body of the serpent with water inside it. And he can be identified very easily by this very long downturned nose. He often carries an axe, which represents lightning. And this lightning axe, it's really interesting, is personified or embodied by another deity called Kawil. And Kawil represents lightning and sustenance. And Kawil was actually, this lightning axe by Chaak released the maize. So another one of our deities is a maize deity who has this sort of elongated head with maize foliage and sometimes a hieroglyph, which represents corn or things made of corn. And in Maya beliefs, the maize deity was sort of entombed within the earth, and maize was not available to beings on the surface of the earth. So Chaak, using his lightning axe or his kawil, broke the earth open and released the maize. And this maize then both was the food of the people, but also it was the flesh of people. So Maya peoples believe that a creator goddess, a grandmother goddess, who's known as Chaak, was responsible for grinding this maize, mixing it with water, forming dough, and then forming people from that dough. And so this female figure is very important in the story of Chaak. The two are paired very frequently in rituals. Both of them are rain bringers. Both of them were petitioned in the past at the start of the rainy season to bring the rains. It's interesting that today in the rituals, it's Chaak, and Chaak has sort of disappeared from this role, which happens sometime between the colonial period and today, and may have something to do with the Spanish came and imposed sort of their social structure. The Maya ethos of paired male-females being important in all realms of life became less important, and things became more patriarchal in a sense.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And the rituals that I'm talking about, these rituals concerning Chaak, Chaakchel, Kawil, and other beings that we call deities, should not be seen simply as folktales or origin myths. Rather, they actually, these narratives and rituals, the performances associated with them, encoded important ecological, place-based, and scientific knowledge. And this is one of the things that I'm really exploring, working with teachers and educators to think about indigenous ways of knowing as providing important, as I said, ecological, place-based scientific knowledge. And I just want to give an example or two from the codices because I think they're really fun. But we have a scene picturing the rain deity Chaak, and he is pictured as a scribe. So he has a paint pot in his hand, and he's got this sort of codex coming out of his mouth, indicating his role as a scribe. And he's painting the tail feathers of this owl that we see pictured. And the whole scene is taking place actually within a cenote, one of these sinkholes that are so important. And he's painting the tail feathers so that the owl will then fly through the sky and paint the clouds black. And these black clouds are laden with water, which will become rain. So this is, very, very much the idea of how the rain cycle works. And we also see Chaak in other almanacs and the codices emerging from these cenotes, which are represented by these serpents with these gaping jaws. And Chaak is emerging with his lightning axe, which really illustrates the idea of surface water as the source of precipitation. So the idea of evaporation. And with Kawil, who I was talking about before, the idea of him being this god of lightning and sustenance. And what links the two of those? Well, it's the understanding of how nitrogen from lightning strikes fertilizes the soil. So lightning actually converts unusable nitrogen from the atmosphere into nitrates that plants can absorb through their roots.
Wow.
So I just found this fascinating as I started really digging into what are deities, what do they mean, and what do they tell us?
That is fascinating. I'd never thought of it like that, but it does actually make complete sense, doesn't it?
It really does.
When do they have these rituals then to fetch the rains?
So it depends. So I'm going to start by talking about contemporary rituals and then look at some that we see represented in pre-Hispanic sources.
Because they are still going on today, aren't they, these rituals?
They are still going on today. Two areas where we really see them. One is the northern area, the Yucatan, and the other is in the southern area, in the area of Honduras and parts of Guatemala with the Tortí Maya. And both of these cultures, as you said, some peoples, some communities still practice these rituals, and they're done under the supervision of a men, which is a ritual specialist who's been trained in communicating with the deities and determining the proper times for the rituals. So that's a really good question because there are a lot of things that are used to determine when to do the rituals. Sometimes it's based on positionings of constellations in the sky. So we know when the Pleiades reach a certain level in the sky, it's time to start planting. So the Chaak or fetching the rain ritual is sometimes done at the start of the planting season to encourage the rains to come. And that's certainly true among the Tortí Maya. They do it in late April. But at other times, it's not actually performed unless there's a drought. So sometime in July, if there's a drought and things are not progressing well, there might be sort of an emergency Chaak ritual performed.
Is that an issue now with thinking about sort of global warming and stuff, and the way that, I don't know Central America very well. I've been, but not for many years. But are they suffering from sort of the peaks and troughs that we're seeing perhaps over here in Europe, where like, for example, we've just had an incredibly wet, even for Britain, an incredibly wet winter. But, last summer we had a lovely dry summer, but that's not good if you're trying to grow anything, really, whether you're growing apples at home or wheat to make bread commercially. So is it the same currently in sort of the Yucatan and Guatemala?
Yeah, well, these climate extremes are definitely affecting things more. We've had some really severe hurricanes and all sorts of unexpected. The temperatures just have been up and down and up and down. And all of this does impact when it's time to plant, when the rains come. So we are certainly seeing challenges in that regard. I do want to mention, though, that the droughts are not uncommon in the Maya region. And part of the explanation for the reorganization of society before the post-classic period is because there was a period of prolonged drought. And these Chaak, these rainmaking rituals, become especially important during that time.
Yeah.
So Chaak, we see him rising out of these cenotes, as I mentioned in the almanacs. We also frequently see him depicted in caves, and this is where he resides when he's not in the sky as rain. And so in the past, these rainmaking rituals would have been performed in caves. And we have examples from a cave outside of Chichen Itza, one of the Maya sites, probably well-known Maya sites, the UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Yucatan. One of these is called Balancanche, and we see there we have vessels that are dedicated to the rain deity, although rather than representing Chaak per se, the Yucatec Maya rain god, they have features of the Central Mexican rain deity, Tlaloc. So we know there was a lot of contact between these cultures in this post-classic period. And we also have other really fascinating artifacts that were deposited as part of these rituals, such as these grinding stones and spindle whorls, which were used in weaving. So when you're spinning cotton into thread, you have to have this whorl kind of at the base to keep it from fluctuating too much as you're spinning. And these spindle whorls are decorated with motifs of flowers and birds, like quetzal, which is the national bird of Guatemala today. It's a bird with these beautiful long tail feathers that was really important to Maya cultures. So we think these rituals were part of what we call world renewal ceremonies. So at the start of the new year, ceremonies were performed, and we have representations of them in almanacs and codices that include sacrifices, offerings of food, sometimes the letting of blood. And they were performed in front of these sort of trees. And at the cave of Balancanche, in the central space, you have stalactites and stalagmites growing together, looking like one of these world trees in the center. And these rituals, we have Chaak represented as the being who is receiving the offerings, which include turkeys sacrificed and ritual offerings of sacred breads, tamales, and porridges with different kinds of animal parts. Iguanas were part of them, or sometimes turkey, sometimes fish, sometimes deer. And so we see these rituals as being important, not just associated with the rainy season itself, but actually at the start of the year, which would have been probably at this time around July. So making sure that the year gets off to a good start by making these propitiations to the rain deity. And they're all about making sure there's enough rain and prophecies for the maize crop based on that. And that is something that I don't think we really understood about these year-bearer ceremonies initially, but they really are rain and agricultural ceremonies. Yeah. So we know in contemporary Maya cultures in Yucatan, for example, we have a ceremony that involves constructing an altar where the offerings are made. The ritual space is only open to, in most communities, to the men. And women are the ones responsible for preparing the food offerings for these ceremonies. And as I mentioned, the 4 directions are very important. And also as part of them, one important aspect is going to the cenote. And the cenote is where they get, so it's one outside of the community that's sort of untouched, where they can get water that can be used for ritual rather than water for everyday use. So they get this water, and that water is used to make the ritual offerings that are so important. And in Yucatan, these include something called Chaak, which is a maize-based drink with honey, a very important part of the offering. And then this maize dough, which is made into tamales and also into sort of a broth or porridge that would include chicken parts today, turkey parts in the past, or other animals such as deer. These offerings are cooked in this earth oven, and after they're cooked, they are placed on the altar, which is covered with branches to keep it cool. And these branches of these leaves are a very important part of that. And then this other really interesting part, which we also see in the pre-Hispanic period, is the role played by frogs. So you have, at the time that the rains start, you have frogs in Yucatan that become really, really, really loud, croaking. So Maya people associate the rainy season with these frogs. And to encourage the rains, they have 4 boys who play the role of frogs at the 4 corners of the altar, and they croak like frogs. And we see in almanacs where we have frog associated with the east, with the north, with the west, and the south. And in the center of the almanac, we actually see the rain deity himself with the rain coming. So they do bring the rain. And then you have another very important, it's a beverage. It's called balche. And balche is an alcoholic beverage that's made from fermenting the bark of a tree, the balche tree, in honey and water. And balche is something that, again, dates back to the pre-Hispanic period, very important during the pre-Hispanic period, prohibited by the Spanish during the colonial period. But the Maya found ways to continue making that balche.
Is it very strong?
It's not very strong.
I was going to say, like, is it like small, what we would call small beer over here historically? You sort of a weak beer.
Yeah, it's more like that.
And the frogs, they don't eat the frogs. The boy, I know they definitely don't eat the boys, but just so we're clear, they're not eating the boys.
They're not eating the boys.
And they don't actually eat the frogs either, though. They're not like a delicacy at this time or anything like that.
No, I don't know anything about eating the frogs. They're not mentioned as a food source, or they're not depicted as a food source in the codices, no. But then the offerings are made to the deities, and then the people participating in the ceremony consume them, the balche and the food offerings, and then they take them to the area where the women and children are, and they are also given some of the offerings. One thing that's interesting is that in Yucatan, as I mentioned, the women are kind of segregated, whereas in the southern area, there's, at least in some places, there are these confraternities where men and women, again, like in the past, men and women are both integral to performing the rituals, and they have different roles and they're in different settings, but they're very important. And that's not to say that the women in Yucatan are not important too. They're just not included as much in the ritual aspects, more in the food preparation in Yucatan.
So how have these ceremonies merged with Christianity, or have they remained entirely separate?
Well, the ways they've merged are really in terms of these figures we're calling deities, which we have to think Maya people, lots of indigenous people, see the world, things in the world that we see as inanimate as animate, and things that we see as not as animate, but not really having their own volition as having their own volition. So, for example, mountains are animate and very important in Maya beliefs. So these directions we're talking about are really based on this idea of these 4 sacred mountains defining the different world quadrants. You know, we think of the maize as a plant, but just a plant, whereas they see maize as this deity who has volition, or the rain deity in the same way. And at the time of the conquest, the Spanish introduced and forced Christianity on Maya peoples. Some cases, the friars themselves, and other cases, the Maya peoples saw some connections between the particular Maya deity and a Christian saint or archangel or something of that nature. So they merged in some cases. So Saint Gabriel is one of the wind deities for Maya peoples, and the Chorti, Saint Francis, was their supreme deity who merged with God the Father, who then, when he's on earth, became Saint Francis. And in the Maya highlands, we see a lot of these same sort of mergings. And it didn't just happen with Christianity. It happened before. I mentioned the Maya and Central Mexican cultures had interactions, and we saw that vessel that had sort of the Central Mexican rain deity rather than the Maya rain deity, or some merging of the two. So it was something that happened throughout time. And, it makes sense. That's what cultures do. They adapt things from other cultures. So there's rituals. When you hear the prayers, you hear prayers, you hear Christian saints' names. Sometimes the dates of ceremonies got changed so that they fell on a saint's day instead of in the pre-Hispanic calendar. We had rituals associated with months of 20 days, and we also had a 260-day ritual calendar. So things shifted that way. The rain rituals talk about the rain deity Chaak stopping and performing these rituals in the east, the north, the west, and the south. And they talk about the different offerings that were made. So we have a turtle porridge or tamale. We have a fish offering, that's east, a fish offering for north, an iguana tamale for west, and a turkey one for south. And we see the rain deity appearing in different locations as part of that. And we see the Maya, the intervals between these being the number 13. They use bar and dot system for numbers. So we have 13 between each of these. And my advisor, Victoria Bricker, actually had been at a rainmaking ritual in the community of Jocabá in Yucatan in the 70s, and noticed that they still moved east, north, west, south. They had very similar types of offerings, but instead of 13-day intervals, it was 14 days based on the week. Okay. So these are some of the kind of changes we see.
Interesting. I mean, we've already touched upon it already about the global warming aspect. Will it affect, do you think, the continuation of these ceremonies going forward?
I think they may become even more important, probably. As you said, the rains seem so unpredictable, even though I am affiliated with UNC Chapel Hill. I'm based in Florida, and we had a very, very, very dry year and drought last year. And now this year, the rains are coming earlier than they were. So the same thing's happening there. It's much more unpredictable. One thing that I think is important is sharing the knowledge from these pre-Hispanic materials when they also had issues of drought and so forth to help Maya people today better understand what was happening in the past and hopefully, somehow be able to apply it to the present. Some of the things that are happening and are not necessarily new, the practice of monoculture rather than farming with multiple crops together has become something that's happened in various parts where you have coffee plantations, for example, which does, of course, lead to that deforestation we were talking about. I don't know if you're familiar with the Maya train project. I'm sure you probably have heard of it, but a train's been constructed across the Yucatan Peninsula to link Maya regions to make it easier for tourists and people to travel through the region, which is great. It will cut down on cars, but also to create the train. Of course, it went through a lot of different ecosystems. Archaeological sites were impacted, communities were impacted, and it seems to also be impacting the corridors for various animals such as the jaguars, pumas that are in danger. So those sort of things happening. Also, these cenotes, the aquifers, are, and in some cases, again, as part of tourism, they're being used as swimming holes, and they're trying very hard to keep people from going in with sunscreen on and those sort of things. But this does, of course, impact the aquifer itself. In terms of the culture, my culture is very adaptive, has had to be for a very long time. But I think one of the things with the need to go outside the community to work often and with tourism, there's been a huge loss of language. And losing the language is one of the things that has the most impact on cultural traditions. Because as part of that language, like you have the deity Kawil that I mentioned, and as part of that are all those associations, the god of lightning, the god of sustenance, the role played in bringing maize to the people. All of those ideas tied into the language, and as you start losing the language, you start losing those ideas. There's definitely efforts to bring that language back, and which are very important. The Maya codices also have almanacs that talk about the care and rituals associated with stingless bees. So stingless bees were a native bee, very important in the pre-Hispanic period for their honey. And unfortunately, because of the deforestation and all of the things happening, there's been a huge loss of the stingless bees. So Maya people in the past kept stingless bees for their honey. And today, some people still doing their efforts to bring more of the stingless bees back. I'm working with a nonprofit that is involved in that. And I think even though, we don't necessarily think of that this way, they're such an important part of the whole ecosystem because they pollinate a lot of the important crops and trees. And so as you start losing this, you lose your pollinators and you see this whole system falling apart. So it's really important to think of things in the broader terms where, when you do impact studies, does anyone think about the stingless bees, those sort of things that are so important. So I think that these efforts that are being done by nonprofits and there are some government programs to not just the stingless bees, but all around the agriculture and these traditions are all so important in terms of hopefully being able to preserve this, not a frozen static culture, an adaptive culture, but to keep that knowledge, that ancestral knowledge, and use it and apply it as you can, because it probably addresses a lot of issues that people are facing today.
Absolutely. Are they teaching the language, incidentally, at school to younger people?
So we're seeing the grandparents being monolingual speakers of, say, Yucatec. The parents having grown up with these parents speaking Yucatec, but learning Spanish in schools, and because of school and work, speaking mainly Spanish and speaking mainly Spanish to their children. So their children don't know much Yucatec. And so the community was very interested in revitalizing the language. And I was asked to come in and work with them actually on the stingless bee almanacs as a means to look at the language, language from 500 or so years ago, but a lot of the vocabulary is very similar. So worked with kids to read some of these and do activities with the words for different animals and plants and things of that nature.
So Gaby, what will you be bringing to the season's potluck supper?
I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I had a couple different possibilities, but what I ended up deciding on was my cornbread, which I love to make with actually the stingless bee honey. Stingless bee honey doesn't taste like any honey you've had before. And it just, with that corn, it's just really delicious. So I hope you all enjoy our cornbread with stingless bee honey. And I'm looking forward to enjoying what are you bringing, Sam?
Well, I mean, normally I don't have to bring anything because my guests are so generous. But actually, I did do a watercress episode recently. And because I was doing most of the narration, I did say, well, I think it's only fair that I bring a dish. It was basically pears on toast with watercress. But I do it with like a watercress pesto and then some melted Stilton cheese. So that was my contribution.
That's delicious.
It is delicious. And that's the joy of a potluck is that we have a variety of dishes that people can sample. If only we could actually do it in real life. But one day.
I know. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Yes.
It would. So what's next on the horizon for you?
Well, this project I mentioned with the stingless bees is something I'm working on There's a week in June called Pollinator Week, and we have some activities planned actually in North Carolina at the Museum of Life and Science to educate people about stingless bees and native bees, which of course are not unique to the Yucatan. They're native bees all across the continent. So that's a really important project for me. When I was talking about the rituals that take place in caves, and I mentioned Balancanche, that's something I've been working on for a number of years, just sort of analyzing the material there and trying to come to a good understanding of the rituals that were performed and how they related to what's happening in central Mexico. I'm also working with a group to encode Maya hieroglyphs so that we can make them available on the keyboard so that you can type keystrokes, and just like you have fonts for Times Roman and so forth, you can type Maya glyphs. That's something that's being sponsored. Yeah.
That'd be amazing.
By the Script Encoding Initiative at Unicode. I know, wouldn't that be amazing? So we're a couple years away from that happening, but we're making great progress on that. I have a couple publications coming out soon. I have been working with colleagues over the years on a catalog of Maya glyphs, and we have our third catalog coming out in the next year. And I have a book on placemaking and indigenous cultures in Mesoamerica and the U.S. Southwest, probably coming out within the next year as well. I'm part of a book project about the Maya stingless bees, and I don't know exactly when that'll coming out, but I have a chapter in there that I think your readers would find very interesting as well.
Well, let me know when those books come out or publications come out so that I can let my listeners know. Yeah, because they sound fascinating. But I want to learn more about these stingless bees now. It sounds like a fascinating project because it's mostly women, isn't it, that look after the bees and harvest the honey.
Yeah. So in the past, sometimes women were the ones who cared for them, but the men were the ones who took the honey in the past. This initiative is being done by a woman based in Asheville, North Carolina, and she's very much trying to empower women. The honey is being used not just as food, but also basically for its medicinal properties. Stingless bee honey has a number of medicinal properties. What happens is the hives are housed in these hollow logs, or they used to be hollow logs. Now they're creating sort of different kind of chambers. But women in different communities who are interested are being set up with these hives and trying to care for the bees using the traditional techniques, but also some things that we've learned over the years more from Western science. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that, right now the bee population is still very small compared to what it was in the past. Yeah. But hopefully this will catch on.
Well, thank you very much for your time today and for sharing your work and some beautiful images, which sadly our listeners won't be able to see, but I will put links to your website so that they can go and view some of these images online. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we'd all like to hear more about the Stingless Bee Initiative, so hopefully Gaby will return at a later date to tell us more. You can find links to Gaby's current books in the show notes, along with a link to her website on the Maya hieroglyphic codices. Next time on the Comfortably Hungry podcast, we'll be back on home turf as I take a trip to Droitwich to find out how the local brine springs have shaped the town's fortunes over the centuries.
The water flows through under Droitwich, dissolves the rock salt, and then through natural fissures in the ground, through pressure, it's forced to the surface as brine. So that means that we don't have the vast expense and trouble of getting all the way down there to get the rock salts out.
Yeah.
It just dissolves and it's brought up for us by Mother Nature.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you really loved it, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, as it really will help other listeners discover Comfortably Hungry. Don't forget to pop along to sambilton.com, where you'll find details on my books, which include my latest publication, Much Ado About Cooking, written in collaboration with Shakespeare's Globe. This new cookbook features recipes inspired by the food in the Bard plays and was huge fun to write, so I think it will be right up your street. You may also want to subscribe to the Comfortably Hungry Substack, which includes more detailed notes from the show. You can subscribe for free, but if you become a paid subscriber for £3.50 a month, you'll also get recipes inspired by the topics covered in the show and access to extra content. Alternatively, you can leave me a one-off tip via Ko-fi to show your appreciation. Just click on the relevant link in the show notes. Your support will help fund the research required to produce Comfortably Hungry. It also means that I can avoid including those pesky ads that may interfere with your enjoyment of the podcast. If you have any questions relating to this season's theme, you can leave a comment in the chat section of the Comfortably Hungry Substack page or tag me on social media. Remember, you can find me on Instagram, Threads and Blue Sky at Mrs. Bilton, that's with 2 S's. I'll be plunging back into the liquid world of food and drink history soon, but until then, take care. Comfortably Hungry is research produced and presented by food historian Sam Bilton, with sound mixing and production by Thomas Dinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. Additional sound effects and music are provided by Zapsplat and Pom5.